apprenticeship at T-level, or I hope very soon, modular learning. This is the real revolution in education in many ways, where the best way I can describe it to you is through an example. Google launched Google certificates, where people can take certificates in digital, very, very specific sector of education, and do brilliantly. And I launched these with Alphabet's CFO when I was Secretary of State for Education. And I met this amazing young man called Usman. Usman clearly just arrived here, either an immigrant or a refugee, with his young wife, and he's self-taught to be a programmer. So some of these kids sitting at home actually are doing interesting things. He said, I'm great at Python and Ajax and other programming technologies, but no one would ever give him a job because he doesn't have a certificate, he doesn't have a qualification. And so he heard of Amazon, so he applied to be a warehouse, basically packing boxes at Amazon's Dallaglio warehouse, because he thought maybe someone would listen to him there, that he can tell them about his programming ability. And of course, they just said, Usman, keep packing the boxes, my friend. But he discovered the Google certificates, and being so talented, he did the whole certificate program and aced them all. And now he's in the Amazon software program in their software team. So lots of, I think, exciting new innovation taking place in education. But we need scale. And my final message, which I slightly pushed back with respect to the chairman of the Education Select Committee, because you can actually go back and look at this. When the inquiry was set up, the COVID inquiry, this Secretary of State wrote to the inquiry to say we need to include the impact on young people in the inquiry. And of course, that was then done. So it wasn't so much of a nudge from anyone. I knew exactly what I want to see from the inquiry, and we've got it in place.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to bring Lawrence in and Kathryn in a moment, and Rachel when she comes. But we'll just slightly be unconventional with this because I know you have to go. I'll just ask you a question, and if there's any questions to the floor, very quickly. I suppose the point is that it's hugely worrying that the government didn't even think of children until we mentioned it, point one. And second of all, I appreciate everything you said about being at the DFE and all the rest of it, and indeed kind of curricular learning and what some kids can gain extracurricularly if they find out about it. But this statistic that there has been a 70% real-term decline in local authority expenditure on youth services between 2010 and 2018-19, which is entirely the tenure of the Conservative Party and coalition, whose fault is that then, the local authorities or the government?
No, local authority budgets have been clearly under pressure. When we came into office in 2010, you'll remember, we were in the middle of a maelstrom post the financial crash and the crisis of around 08, 09. And we had to take action to try and remedy that situation. And there's no doubt that local government budgets have come under huge strain and pressure. But the government also then wanted to make sure that we continue, or at least return to investing in youth hubs and, of course, in young people. And when I got to the Department of Education, made sure that I made very clear to the then Chancellor that we need to continue to invest in skills, for example. And we had the biggest uplift in skills investment, 3.8 billion, from Rishi Sunak at the time for that investment. So, the numbers from 2010 are stark. But we had then gone through a sort of financial heart attack. And then, of course, followed more recently with the pandemic, and now with war on our continent. All these things. If you think about the energy intervention that Liz Truss just made, and by the way, we already were midway when I was Chancellor of the Exchequer through delivering the £37 billion of help to households on energy bills. What she's now delivered is a quantum figure, because we're not going to allow Putin to win this war by using energy as a weapon against us for the help we're bringing to Ukraine. But that's another subject. All I'm saying is there's a economic context to that, as well as the stark headlines of this number.
There's a timing context to this, and if your special advisor is going to be like this. Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Thank you very much for joining us. Right, we had to get that out of the way so we can speak to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so let's give him a round of applause. I don't know if we have yet sight of Rachel, but in the meantime, let's get to our panel. So obviously Lawrence Dallaglio needs no introduction as a former rugby player. Indeed, Kathryn Morley, who's from Onside, she's going to tell us about her organisation and also her thoughts in relation to this title, Young People Are Our Future. How can we get them on side, to coin a phrase, Kathryn?
Not the first time. It's great to be here, and obviously we're slightly depleted panel just at the moment, but I'm sure it will fill up again shortly. It's a really important topic. And I think it's fair to say that we all believe in giving young people opportunities, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. We all want young people to shine, find their passion, believe in themselves and find their future. But the big question is how do we do this, particularly for those from deprived communities? And what are we doing to achieve it? I mean, schools do work, as said, schools work really hard, they do work really hard trying to achieve that, but they can't do everything in their 20% of the hours that you talked about. And they certainly can't do it for all young people. There are young people who school just doesn't work for, which I think Lawrence is going to come on to talk about a bit more as well. So more than ever now, young people need safe spaces to go and socialise outside of school, to grow and develop with trusted adults who can support them to move towards adulthood more successfully. And for those that aren't aware, Onside Youth Zones, we have large state-of-the-art facilities in 14 parts of the UK, in 14 towns and cities across the UK. And we're growing, we're adding new ones every year, and at the moment 50,000 young people are benefiting from having access to a youth zone. They're open 7 days a week, all evenings and weekends, and then open in the school holidays as well during the daytime. So one of the key things about them is that they're business-backed local charities, and that gives the funding that you talked about. You know, where does the funding come from for something that is non-statutory? So youth provision generally, some of the targeted work around young people with disabilities and young people in care is statutory, but the bulk of it is not statutory, and hence that's why it's all gone. So youth zones really tap into the business desire and will to help society and young people in particular reach adulthood more successfully. And we've actually got the Wigan Youth Zone team here with us today. Hello Wigan, thanks for joining us. So we understand, and the Wigan team understand even better, the power of universal provision and the impact it can have on young people in transforming their lives, raising their aspiration, helping young people reach their full potential. And probably the key thing in the whole thing is it's a voluntary relationship, unlike school. You only go if you want to go, you do what you want to do when you're there, you chat with who you want to chat to, both other young people and adults, and you leave when you want to leave. And that's really powerful for a non-formal learning environment. That allows young people to come open to listening, talking and learning things, you know, not lessons in school, but lessons in life. And the trusted adults are really positive. There's something about that third place, away from the family and away from school. So an environment where you are unshackled from what you are in those two places, where you can be yourself and grow into the person that you want to be. And there's a huge need for youth services and youth provision, not just youth zones, but any form of youth service and youth provision. If you think about it, it's not just what we talked about mental health and the growing amount of mental health issues that young people, and the growing number of young people who have mental health issues, but also the loneliness and isolation that comes from the digital world, from the reduction in other activities for young people to do, from the cost of doing activities. But there's also young people who have additional needs, who need to have safe spaces to go to. There's young people who are looked after children, who are looked after by the state. They have a huge need for places to go outside of school, away from the home that isn't their family home. Just being in a chaotic family gives you a need to go somewhere where you can just be yourself and be away from that. So there's just this whole range of reasons why young people, and when you add that all up, that's a huge proportion. And really every young person needs somewhere safe and inspiring to go in their leisure time. So there's the general need, but then there's also this huge amount of variety of needs for young people individually. And it helps, there's this virtuous cycle. When young people feel more confident and better about themselves, they start to see more purpose in school, and they start to attend school and do better at school. I mean, I know Rachel, when she comes, will probably talk about it, but there's a huge number of young people who don't go to school now. And Lawrence will speak to it too. You know, if you're not in mainstream school, you might be in a Peru or somewhere, but you might not be going at all. And through COVID, there's a whole additional number of young people who don't attend school at all. We want young people to be feeling better about themselves so they can then connect with school and connect with their future and start believing in their future. And that's what youth zones and all other youth provision does. And the one thing that makes the youth zones different is this business connection. The business community fundamentally fund the youth zones. We do get money from the local authorities, but the lion's share come from the business community. Somewhere between...
I wasn't meant to be good
somewhere between £500,000 and £1 million a year is provided by the business community every year for every youth zone that we have, and that's a huge amount of finances that can fund all of the work that goes on and all of the basics that you need to run an organisation and operation. It's unrestricted funding, so it's absolutely fantastic. And that's because the business community really care about their community, and they do want to help young people. They want to invest in young people and help them reach adulthood successfully. And there's a growing appetite. I mean, you know, we all had the reaction to the 45 rate, and the fact that that's now gone. The business community don't actually want the divide to get any bigger. They want it to get smaller. They want to help. They want the future workforce to be properly equipped. They don't want to see a bigger gap and a bigger divide. And this cost of living crisis has actually opened up another opportunity with them, because it's an opportunity to supercharge philanthropy. Really, you know, we're having business community members coming forward saying they want to fund meals at youth zones. They want to find ways to help us be open more, to allow people to come in the day to stay warm, warm hubs. And my absolute final point really is about the importance of the whole community, and not, you know, it doesn't just help young people, it helps the whole community. And the whole community can play a big part in helping the youth zone run successfully. It's the business community, it's the young people's energy, it's the other charitable organisations we were talking about. I was talking earlier about how a lot of other providers will use the youth zone to help them succeed against their goals with young people. And to help us move forward, I think that if we can get greater collaboration in communities, that's the way we will unlock growth in youth provision across this country.
Thank you very much for that, Kathryn. That's infectious too. Welcome to your team from Wigan as well. Welcome to Sir Iain Duncan-Smith, co-founder of the CSJ, former Conservative Party leader. You can come in and say do 5 minutes of just a moment. No, that's fine. But next I'd like to bring in Lawrence Dallaglio, who can talk about, actually, before I do that, I was just going to, you mentioned the report, because the CSJ did a report on the lost children of lockdown, which is well worth a read. And the statistic on how many children have gone missing from the school rolls is 100,000, have almost entirely disappeared from education since schools returned last year. Prior to COVID-19, there was already an 18-month attainment gap, which is only set to increase. And actually, there was a good panel yesterday talking about that attainment gap having got much wider because of the lockdowns, which Sir Iain pointed out should never have happened, and certainly schools should never ever have been closed. Lawrence, over to you, where you can give us an idea as well about what Dallaglio RugbyWorks does as well.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the CSJ for putting this event on. Just looking at the strapline, putting social justice at the heart of British politics. It was very nice of the Right Honourable Gentleman to give us 5 minutes of his time. That's clearly nowhere near the heart of British politics, is it really? But that's what young people feel at the moment. They don't feel like they're not, you 5 minutes of my time, because he's got something really important to go to and listen to. That's what young people feel about politics right now, because they feel like they're the last on the list. That's what I feel like, because I've given up all day to be here today to get 5 minutes of the Right Honourable Gentleman's time. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair. Thank you. I think sport is, in my life, I've learned a couple of things, thankfully. It's a results-driven business. It's about getting results. And it's about having honest and uncomfortable conversations. And today is going to be an honest and uncomfortable conversation about the state of our education system. Everyone's feeling okay, I hope, in the room. Let's be honest, it's been a pretty crap 3 years, isn't it, for all of us? We do a lot of visualisation in sport. Imagine, okay, I got 2 things in my life: unconditional love and a belief system and a support system that I could go out and conquer the world. And thankfully I was able to do that. But imagine being, for a second, as a visualisation, imagine coming from quite a chaotic background. Imagine not having a support system. Imagine not having that unconditional love as a young person. Imagine being the primary carer in your own home, age 14 or 15. Imagine being excluded from school and having no one that wants anything to do with you. 65% of everyone excluded permanently from school is in prison at the moment. So what we're creating is this part of society that no one seems to really care about. Okay? So imagine being in that situation. Visualise yourself. Would you want someone to come and help you? The answer is yes, of course you want someone to come and help you. Is there someone helping you at the moment? No. Do you think it's the government's job to come and help you? Absolutely it is. And I don't mind having uncomfortable conversations. I know it creates a little bit of emotion and it creates an atmosphere, but I think we need to do that. The government needs to understand that actually young people feel so disenfranchised at the moment, and can imagine being an excluded young person. Imagine being on the poverty line, just being completely excluded. These uncomfortable conversations need to happen. And yes, tax cuts and all these things that are taking centre stage at the moment, but the reality is, we've had unconditional love, we have a support system, and we're finding life quite difficult right now. And if you're not, then I'd love to speak to you about it. But imagine being these young people that we all work with, and that we're all campaigning for. They are really, really struggling. Now, I'm just going to give you a few statistics, because things are going to get a lot worse, whether it's this government or the next. Things are going to get a lot worse for young people. There's 26 exclusions every single day, okay? Do you think that number's going to go up or down in the next few years? I'd say it's probably going to go up. The school education system, in my mind, is a busted flush. I mean, it's completely busted flush, and it needs discussing, okay? And it needs bringing right to the front of the agenda. Absenteeism is going to go up in the next few years because kids are terrified, they're frightened to go to school. The curriculum, as it exists right now, is not fit for the 19th century, let alone the 21st century. Okay? And we need to accept that, we need to understand that, and we need to do something about it. Now, we're not going to do it today, but it needs to be placed further up the agenda, and government needs to realise that young people, who clearly are our future, I have 3 young kids, okay? And we need to do things that are actually going to make a big, big difference. And after schools clubs are one part of the equation. We all know very easily that, I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? I'm pretty sure most of the crime statistics would suggest that most crimes are committed between the hours of 3 o'clock and 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. Okay, because young kids, when I was a young kid, I went to a youth club. 60% of them have been closed down in the last 12 years. There's been no investment in people. Just so we're clear, it's people and relationships that change young people's behaviour. Okay, it's not buildings, it's not bricks and mortar, it's not investing in nice shiny, new toys. It's people and relationships that change young people's behaviour, and that's what we need to do. So all I would ask is that we start to think about things slightly differently, and we start to put young people at the front of the agenda. Because I go back to what I said at the beginning, we've all got very nice lives, we've all got very cosy lives. If you're a really young person, whether you're in care or you're out of care, if you are in a really chaotic situation, who's going to come and help you right now? County Lions games, they're the ones that are probably helping you at the moment. Who's going to come and help you? Not the government, not this government, and probably not the next government, because until they raise the young people on the agenda, it's not going to get dealt with. Thank you. So it was a bit emotional.
Really appreciate the passion with which you're speaking, because that's what these panels are all about. So Iain, can you address some of this, because you've been a sort of lifelong champion of young people in your career, and yet we do have this sense that they have fallen through the cracks, not least after the pandemic, and what are some of the solutions here?
Well, first of all, can I thank the panel for being here to do this, and all of you for coming. My apologies for slight delay, but I was at another CSJ event about how we bring the money to invest into things like this, and I want to come back to that in a second. And yesterday, the CSJ held an event about what's happened to kids, young people, as a result of the lockdown. Where are they now? They're in a much worse state than they were, and they're in a pretty bad state before. They just got a lot worse, and so all the stuff that Lawrence has been saying is absolutely right. We're going to face a tsunami of problems. We're already beginning to pick it up, but it's like all tsunamis, wait till the last bit, because that's the bit that floods you. So the CSJ is about that, and we are genuinely, throughout this conference, being completely ignorant about all the other stuff that's going on, because we think this is the most important issue around. Because if we don't get this right, the next generation aren't right, and that means none of your businesses run, you have none of the skills to do that, and this country slowly just disappears. So we want to change all of that. So I absolutely agree. I set up the Centre for Social Justice originally because of a long-time connection to Easterhouse and Gallagate during my time when I was leader. I just was puzzled about what it was about our cities where, if you take Glasgow in this particular case, one area has a life expectancy of 60, and if you walked for 20 minutes, the other area had a life expectancy of 82. And within the same city, next door to each other, how can the life expectancies be so different, and how can the outlooks be? And so we set up this whole process about looking at what we call the pathways to poverty. The 5 pathways were family breakdown, debt, failed education, addictions, and worklessness. Now, all of these become part of kids' lives quite early on. One leads to the other, and they are circular. So breaking that chain and giving kids and families a way out is really what the Centre for Social Justice is about. So I just wanted to establish that on what we were doing. We did a huge paper some years ago, and then a modified one, on the origin of gangs and what happens to street gangs and how you deal with them. And the interesting thing about that is most of the local authorities and police forces just ignored it. We got 1 or 2 to try it, and gang violence, gang attendance went down, antisocial behaviour fell. So interventions can work, but they need to be long-term, they need to be forever. So I want to come back to the youth problem we face. We did have a big problem. About 18 kids were at primary were about 18 months behind their peer group in higher income groups in academic achievement. That's now gone way past 2 years since the lockdowns. The lockdowns were a complete disaster for everything else. Well, we did them because we thought it would save lives. I debate whether the way we did it actually did that. But the second thing is what we did do is trash a lot of lives en route to that one single idea. Because if you are in a poor area, and we saw most of this through the eyes of middle-class people, okay, about their summer and their gardens and all the rest of it. But if you're living in a tower block, which is 20 stories high, and you're on the 17th, 18th or 19th, the best you might hope for would be a little balcony outside. The rest of the time, you were being threatened about being prosecuted if you stepped outside of that building. You've got 3 kids, you're a lone parent, you're trying also to go off to work because a lot of those lone parents were working in jobs that we all needed them to do because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to get our deliveries or anything else. Life was a nightmare. Those kids did not have computer access, they did not take part in the education that the rest did, and thus they fell behind. And now worse than that, a whole load of them have now gone absent from the education system completely because schools no longer now are chasing up on kids that don't turn up, because they've got other problems too. So the scale of the problem is enormous. And actually this should be the main discussion point that we should be having throughout the whole of this conference, frankly. So if I want to come back to ways you can achieve change, it's hugely centred now. We must centre our policy around change for children and families that are in these difficult positions. The onside bit is one element of that right now. I mean, I have to tell you that I think every single area at least should have an onside centre in that area. There's no question at all about it. We should do it straight away. Government has the money, by the way, because they set money aside at the beginning, because I persuaded them to do it in their budget, to be able to help seed-corn this change. Now, the thing about these onside academies, they're not just, sport is a hugely important part of people's lives, particularly those kids that don't get the chance to do it, because it gives them a sense of achievement, aspiration. Competition is important because it's what you learn very quickly, is you don't always win in life. Sport teaches you how to lose. Learning to lose is more important than learning to win sometimes, because you understand what you do next to put that right. You keep getting told by teachers, don't worry because everybody's okay and we never have to worry about it. It's not how life is. So sport's vital and important. I learned more from sport than I did, I think, from my education system, frankly. I used to scam off on quite a lot of my education system, but I didn't scam off from my rugby or my football or cricket or anything else, because I learned more on that. And the thing is, onside teaches you that because it makes it available to kids who would never get that stuff from their school or when they're not in school. It does more than that, though, because it offers up all sorts of other alternatives. The local charities move into those areas and they teach them stuff. They work with difficult kids to try and get them off their problems. They work with the parents as well to try and help them to discover what their problems are so they can put them right. Here is one single setup that will do more to help kids in difficult areas than almost anything else we could possibly do. There should be one in every single area. And if the government really wanted to change lives, I would do that straight away. It's ready-made. It brings the private and the local the money together. That means the local authorities can't do what you were just saying, which is pull the money on the youth centre, because they've got some other better priorities going on. It means they're locked to a project, because otherwise they're going to have to pay the private sector back for the break in the bond. And so this is important, because it means they're in it, and they're in it forever. There's not one of those centres closed as a result of shortages, because they are locked in. And where they're locked in, antisocial behaviour, we know falls by up to 70% in that area. That means the kids are no longer on the streets. It means the street gangs can't function because they need the young kids to work. Without the kids, the gangs don't work because the kids do the moving of the weapons, they do the moving of the drugs, and without them, then the police can move in and arrest the nominals, decapitate, as we used to call it, and the gang collapses. And that is the start of how you begin to break the violence and the threats on the street, which keep people off the streets and keep the families in fear of what they're doing. So that is a very good start. And they're there. You don't have to reinvent this, they're there. It's just a matter of rolling this out and getting the government to put money behind it. The second part of it is hugely around remedial work in schools. You know, we've got to get to those kids where the families themselves struggle with education. There's lots of kids I see in my constituency whose parents struggle with being able to write to me about their problems because they are basically illiterate. They find English difficult. If you look at the prisoners, they give you the best one. You touched on this, Lawrence, earlier. But 60 to 70% of those who go into prison have a reading age of a child of about 9 or 10. These are the guys, and they're mostly guys, by the way, who won't go into a job centre because they're likely to have to sit down, probably with a woman across the desk, and confess to that woman they can't read the contract that they're meant to sign. They can't read it. Now, how embarrassing is that if you're a big bloke going in and you're going to have to tell somebody you don't have the skill to even make that contract? So they won't. So what's left for them to go on to? Some manual labour, 5% of the jobs possible on the whole of the job spectrum they're likely to go for. And failing that, there's always crime. And that's where they're going to disappear. So they end up in prison. It becomes a lifetime process, in prison, out of prison, in prison, out of prison. All of that, you've got to break that cycle. And the key thing to all of this is to get them educated so that when they do come out of prison, then they have more options. So maths and English, two simple subjects that if they're taught properly while they're in prison, they then can stand a chance, as well as moving their housing and all that. So learning that drug addiction, 60, 70% have some kind of polysubstance addiction. They were probably suffering abuse in their families, because many of these would be the kids that didn't turn up to school, with violent, what I call temporary parents coming in, fathers what we call guesting fathers turning up who dislike them because their child was a different child with a different father, and so it goes on. And that domestic violence is big, and it's grown in the course of the lockdown. So dealing with these have got to be major priorities for us, for the government. I'm not in the government, but that's what I would suggest to the government. If we put this right and we start down that, there's a very good chance that we can actually put the rest of our problems right. Because Lance is quite right. At the end of the day, this is about people. People make our economy. People fulfill the jobs that are required. People put back into their society, locally, into communities, their time and their money. Without them, government can't do it. It just doesn't work. So what we want here from Centre for Social is a big change to the attitude about reforming and changing the lives of those at the bottom end of the community, those who have suffered intergenerationally. You need to break that cycle, and the only way you do that is by changing their lives through a variety of different ways. But in all of those ways I've listed, but changing their educational prospects is absolutely critical. And I believe that sport, which is part of the Onside setup, plays a huge part in all of that. All those areas in the community that run community football teams or cricket teams or rugby, all of those, most of them are looking desperately for places to be able to do that. We should be working with local authorities to provide those spaces, to provide those capacities, because that way they can actually begin to change those lives. Its most inspirational thing I can remember in my life is my sports heroes when I was a kid at school. They're still the ones that I look at because they teach you that whole business about winning and losing and coping with it. Because life isn't about winning all the time. Life is a lot of the time about being to settle on the things that you didn't quite achieve and understanding how you put that right. That's the CSJ, that's our template, and that's why we're here at the conference. And I would like all of you to go out of this particular meeting, as I keep saying to all of the meetings that I've been in, and go and collar the MPs and the ministers and say there is but one priority. Change the lives of our children, and we change Britain for the better. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question for myself, and I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm also conscious that the sign language translator is only here for part 4, so if you guys want to ask a question, I'll come to you first. I was going to ask Kathryn first and then Lawrence. Perhaps there's this misconception, and maybe I have it and I'm guilty of it as a mother of modern children, that we've devolved a bit to technology, and we sort of have got this misconception that children have changed in some way because technology has changed. And therefore people might say, oh, well, is there really a market for your youth centres? I mean, do young people really want to do that? Do they consider it cool? And Kathryn, you're on the ground here. Presumably these kids are biting your hand off for this.
Yes, absolutely. We've just completed a survey of 5,000 young people, and they're saying that they're virtually trapped in their bedrooms. They want to socialise. They want to get out and meet other young people, not just at school, but in a broader context. For sure, absolutely, certainly.
And Lawrence, what's your experience on the ground? What kids actually want? A bit of you said they want a helping hand. They want to touch some time, conversation.
Well, if you look at the curriculum, sport is a very small part of the curriculum these days. It's a much smaller part than it ever used to be. I'm not quite sure what's happened, but we've become infatuated with exam results and actually forgotten about the fact that people need to engage outside the classroom as well. So I think what young people want is a safe environment where they can interact and socialise. I mean, why would you not extend the school day? I mean, why would you not extend the school day to include and incorporate arts, sport, whatever it is that it's been ripped away from the curriculum in the last few decades, because we're obsessed with our kids getting A's, B's and C's. Actually, some young people are not designed to be in mainstream education. Some young people, and I was perhaps one of them, not necessarily, sport or arts or anything can be a huge focus. So I would be campaigning this government to extend the school day, and I'm not saying to the existing workforce teachers who are brilliant that they need to do more, because we are already maxed out. But there are organisations, communities, charities like Onside, charities like RugbyWorks that are delivering programmes that are life-changing, by the way. This is not about us putting a rugby ball in someone's hand and saying, wouldn't it be nice to play rugby? This is about us building up their self-esteem, building up their confidence, giving them the skill set to go out and achieve things. I mentioned a statistic, around 63% of people excluded from mainstream currently are in the prison service. That's a fact. okay? If you engage with charities like ours, outside of school time, admittedly with alternative provisional proofs, you have to engage inside school time initially just to get them actually to think about turning up to an after schools, service. But if you do that, you can turn people's lives around quite dramatically. We have an 85% success rate of getting young people into full-time employment education through sport. So currently, 65% are going to prison, okay? 3-year programme from the ages of 14 to 17, whether it's rugby, martial arts, boxing, whatever it might be, we have an 85% success rate. So we are basically doing the government's job for them, but without any funding, right? So wake up, smell the coffees, give the right organisations the right funding, as Iain's already said, and we can change Britain, right? Because currently, the cost to all of us is huge. And my argument is, we arrive in this world with nothing, right? All of us, by the way, and we leave with nothing. I'm not quite sure what we're all chasing in between, health, wealth and happiness apparently, okay? But it's about making a difference. It's about changing, all right? And this government needs to wake up and recognise, and by the way, the next government do as well, because they're going to have an even tougher task, all right? Because the tsunami is here and it's coming, all right? They need to wake up and do something that is going to make a difference to the future generation of this country.
Thank you. Rachel de Souza, she's not snubbed us, she's been locked out of the buildings. Apparently the building's been locked down as a security alert, so she can't actually physically come in. As soon as she does come in, we'll give her a platform. But in the meantime, I think let's open to questions, because I know the sign language guy is only here for another 10 minutes. So do you guys have any questions at all that you wanted to pose to anybody on the panel here? We're just here listening. Anyone? All right, let's open it widely out then. Who would like to ask a question? If you were able to say who you are and where you're from, that would be brilliant. Sir.
Hi, Paul. Thanks very much. Perfect. Hi, my name's Matthew. I'm the youngest local councillor in Harrow Council. I was actually part of the youth parliament and I was a part-time teacher as well. So a lot of the things that Lawrence, for example, what you were saying, really hit home. One of the things that I think is so important when we talk about young people is coordinating. So many different schemes, projects, pilots, ideas, short-term funding for this, that and the other. There's so much going on that people talk about, but it isn't coordinated, and after a couple of years it falls into that grey area. So I'd be interested in what the panel thinks about how we can make sure we coordinate things and actually do stuff for the long term instead of just for today and tomorrow.
Thanks, Matthew. Can I just ask, I have to, because it's an occupational hazard, how old you are or how old you were when you were elected?
I was elected at 22, turned 23 last week.
Okay, brilliant. Kathryn, do you want to kick off with that one?
It is all about money, isn't it? Making it long term. You need the funding to make it long term. And I was in a session earlier today with the Scouts where that's one of the key problems is the funding is so short term, not particularly for the Scouts, but for the whole sector really. And the fact that we all rely on quite a lot of volunteers to support our organisations too. Volunteers need infrastructure around them to help them work well, so that requires funding too. The way that Onside make it work is this the business community fully understand that. They understand the need for ongoing funding, they understand the need to fund infrastructure as well as frontline delivery. And so for me, it is funding is the absolute centre to what will deliver long-term support for young people.
I think it's also about trust though, isn't it? If you run a family, it doesn't work in cycles, does it really, like governments do? It works around trust, and you have to build long-term trust with your children, and they have to trust you as a parent. And the majority of people that we're talking about here they either have very little parenting, non-existent parenting, or it's few and far between. So the only people they trust are the mentors, the coaches, the teachers maybe that they work with. So it's about the government investing in people. Okay, that's what it's about. It's not about a nice shiny new building. Okay, it's about investing in people because it's that trust and it's a long-term relationship you need to build with children because they've never trusted anyone in their lives because they've had no reason to. Okay, so it's going to take time. You're not going to do it in the first session. It's not going to happen in the first year. It's probably a 2 or 3 year program where you have to trust people because they're vulnerable. They're primary carers in their own home. They're the adults in their own house and they're 15, 16 years of age. So you have to build trust. And we as a government need to invest in people to build those relationships back with those young people. And that is the root problem. So yes, I agree, it is money, that's fundamentally what it is. But it's money investing in people to build long-term trust with young people.
And Iain, I mean, what about joined up thinking? Do we need a new government department for children? How can this be administrated at a government level?
Well, there are two things I just want to say about this. First of all, if you want to have support and funding that lasts, you have to bring in the private and voluntary sector. There's no way on earth that, government and local government have got a terrible tendency to find new priorities and then discard others because they're just a pencil mark on the sheet. So youth zones, youth clubs in the past have been that little marginal bit that lies at the bottom. It says, you know what, we've got a bit of a problem, we have to cut back a bit. Well, let's just take that out because it's all right, it's kids, but we'll find something else for them or whatever, and of course they don't. So I've lost count of the number of times I've visited youth centres that are shut down. Literally sitting there, there's buildings, nothing going on inside them, and then every now and then somebody gets them going a bit, and then they shut again because they lose the money. So the only way to do this, and this is why the model of Onside, I think, is really important, it brings the private sector in and the public sector together. Now, one can't jack on the other, as it were, because then that has consequences. And so once you tie in, the thing about private sector is it tends to be much longer in the planning. So when you commit to something and you invest in it, you're therefore going to be with that for a significant amount of time, because that's the way it works. Unless there's some major hiatus, that's what you do. Local government tends to work on a much shorter cycle, sometimes electorally, national government as well. Often just annually, there's a problem, we've got to find the money, and so we cut this. So once you tie those two bits together, the problem is not capital. The problem for the local government is the ongoing support finance, which they have to commit to, and you'll find the problem. So first of all, you need to bring the private and the public together. So government needs also then to provide what I would call the seed corn money to make sure these projects in capital terms can start, and so they can support local government doing it. It's a very small investment for them. So this can be done through the Cabinet Office. That's where I would do it. The Cabinet Office exists to bring government departments together. You don't need to invent a new way of doing it. What you do need to do is to understand what your priority is. And my view is the priority is very simple. You need to get these centres going fast, because they are the one tool that you know resolves a plethora of problems, but also opens the door to the changes that you can make to people's lives elsewhere. We are obsessed with going to university in this country, I have to tell you. No other country is as obsessed as we are, but perhaps America, but Germany sends fewer people to university than the UK does proportionately. No one says the German economy is crap. So why? And they do a lot of investment in apprenticeships, much more about bringing kids on who don't necessarily fit the mold of going to university, but would do well because they're good at skills. So they learn those skills, they go off and train for those, and maybe, just maybe, they end up in university, maybe they end up in work. But what they say is skills training is critical. And that's the other bit of this equation, which has got to happen. We have underfunded FE colleges for years. Now, if you want to have kids learning skills, or people in their 30s changing careers, which often happens because they think they're in a dead-end job, you need the further education centres to be the key to that retraining. But unlike schools and universities that have received quite a lot of money over the years, they might argue not as much as they want, but they've received a lot. FE colleges have been the Cinderella sitting in the middle that have been forgotten about. So you need them to be invested in, because they're the answer to reskilling, training and help for kids that are falling out of the normal schooling system, to pick up that when they want to do things like apprenticeships. And the one last point I'd make is there needs to be a rethink in schools. Teachers are very reluctant to recommend apprenticeship courses to their kids because they think it means they've been a failure. And the truth is, parents are then taught that being an apprentice is a failure by comparison with going off to university. But you know what? You don't have a debt at the end of it. You have a fantastic tradable skill, and you're more likely to be in current employment than almost anybody else that may go to university. So the answer is, we need to have a range of things that help kids and give them choices so that they meet their own abilities to be able to do the job and feel like successes, rather than being told that you're a failure because you didn't get to Oxford.
Thank you. Just like to point out the Telegraph does run an apprenticeship scheme should anyone young feel like applying. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Martin Coles. I am the Chief Executive of the charity that runs the Sea Cadets in the UK. We're one of many organisations that provide young people with a venture that launches them for life and gives them the skills that Lawrence was talking about, gives them that place of confidence and trusted adult that's been talked about. I think, Lawrence, you're 100% on it in terms of unconditional love and support system and how that needs to be replaced or compensated for. Yes, we could go with lots of buildings, and and Onside youth, Onside, fantastic in terms of centres, but that's going to take time. We have a massive willingness amongst adults to volunteer. There are hundreds of thousands of people that volunteer. Why could we not, within the suite of things that we do, because we've got to be radical, do something to incentivise volunteering? What about you get time off for paternity and maternity leave? What about holiday, 1 week required or 2 weeks off if you volunteer as a requirement? What about tax breaks for businesses who allow their people to volunteer? What about tax breaks for employees who volunteer? Those are things that could be changed overnight.
Yeah.
We seem to be able to do other tax changes overnight. Let's do a radical one that does something for the people who don't actually get a vote, our young people.
While you're with us, just with your Sea Cadets experience, sir, have you found that when you've gone into schools they've been receptive or actually tried to?
Most of ours is community, all of ours is community, it's all in the local community. It's like the Scouts or the Guides. What I can tell you is that we're in 75% of the demographically challenged, most demographically challenged locations in England, and our waiting lists have almost doubled in the since January.
And you talk
There
about
is
quick-
massive demand.
Talk about the quick wins. I mean,
Yeah.
Iain mentioned the point. You know, we as a charity outside the same, we work in 20% of the most deprived areas in the country. We need that investment in the communities, in the people in those areas to make a real difference to people's lives. And
adults-
whether it's in
yeah.
school with excluded, you have to engage them in school because you're not going to engage them out of school unless you build their trust in school. But equally, I believe there are some quick wins. I think investing in these communities, these charities like yourselves, like ours, you know, to actually replace the full-time teachers at the end of the school day and actually deliver something quite meaningful and quite transformational is the way forward.
Many young people do it because it's not in school.
Yes.
And they want to do it.
Yeah.
And the other point is the reason why we need to incentivise volunteers is they are challenged by the cost of living crisis just the same as everybody else, and we need to do something to unlock to enable them to get involved.
Iain.
Yeah, there is scope for this actually, by the way, because there was stuff done when I was in government about giving people time off. So this is very easy to do. It's a very simple measure. The next budget, all it simply says, you will get tax relief as a company if your individuals are allowed a certain amount of volunteering. One thing I will say about the cadets, though, that actually, and here's a slight criticism, because I deal with the Sea Cadets, I deal with the Air Cadets, and I deal with the Army in my area, but you're all treated slightly differently. So I would have a little word in the words of the MOD, because the ones that are best supported by their parent, as it were, are the RAF cadets. They get nearly 70% of their cadets end up in the RAF as a result. They get lots of their equipment paid for. I know it's slightly less at the moment, but they were the best. The Army, without them, I thought that the Navy were actually not as good about supporting the Sea Cadets as they should have been. Lots of them therefore struggle inside their buildings. They get supported in a sense of visits and support, but financial support. So what I would want to say is also, in the case of the cadets, I'd love to expand your role. I also noticed that quite often schools are reluctant to allow visits by those who run the cadet forces, because some of them are very anti the idea of military units coming in, which I think is completely bonkers, by the way, because they do such a lot of good in the community, because they teach them skills and discipline and all the things that we want kids to have, so they're more likely to end up back in school doing the right thing, because that's the form. So it's not just about government money, it's also about an attitude in the educational system that should be supporting all of those kind of groups that get kids to do gainful employment in the evenings, so they're not out on the street. That I would say schools should be part of this process, and they shouldn't be allowed to lock those groups out.
Just another quick win, by the way, and I don't want to embarrass anyone here, but I'd love to know a hand for those who went to state school and those who went to fee-paying schools in this room. But I started half my young life as in the state system, and then my parents worked out that they could do 4, 5, 6 jobs. I thought my dad might, rob the bank or something, but I ended up in a fee-paying school. And what I found was that there was a stark difference in the facilities available. I went to a school called Appleforth College here in Yorkshire, which had 28 rugby pitches. Okay, 28 rugby pitches. And I would argue that there are some quick wins for young people. I don't know what the current policy is around tax relief for private schools, charitable status, etc. But what I do know is that about 80–90% of the playing fields of this country seem to be locked away for about 3/4 of the year. I don't really think that is levelling the playing field quite literally, do you? So therefore, I would urge that we need to do something to make sure that any private school, of which I was a very good beneficiary for 4 or 5 years, actually partners with state schools in the area. And if they would like charitable status, and if they would like to get the tax relief that they get from being part of that, then they should make their playing fields available to the young people who possibly can't get to them at the moment. Because I do genuinely think that levelling the playing field quite literally means levelling the playing field. And at the moment, we have those who have and those who don't have. And then we've got the people that I work with those who don't care about either. So levelling the playing field, if you're going to write it, let's do it.
Kathryn, I'll bring you in on the next question, because I know that lady in the purple has got one. Also, that speaks to this second line of this briefing note. Talent is evenly distributed, but not opportunity. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Save the Children. It's great to have an event about young people. I guess I'm aware that we've not heard from many young people. No offence to the panel. One thing that we hear quite often from children and young people that we work with is about their experience and their family's experience of poverty. And I'm just interested in, we know that 2.9 million children in the UK live in poverty, and I'm interested in what the panel thinks government's priority should be when it comes to tackling child poverty.
Kathryn, you go with that first, please.
Yeah, I mean, the youth centre seeing, I'm sure the team at Wigan can talk to the increase in needs, specifically now, more than ever before. I don't know if we want to hear just slightly from young people for a second. Is it anything you want to say at all about how the cost of living crisis is starting to affect you, or either the staff or the young people? I don't want to spring it on you too strongly. Gemma.
We have to bring it on you. Where's the microphone?
Well, the challenge came where we're not hearing from young people.
Thanks.
So if you feel you can speak, Gemma.
Yeah.
This is Gemma from Wigan Youth. So
I'm Gemma
amongst
from
friends.
Wigan.
Yeah.
So obviously, with the cost of living slowly rising, we are all seeing that it is affecting us. So personally, it has affected me and my family quite a lot. So just to let you all know that I am a young carer, I'm not ashamed to hide it, although a lot of people are. So that means for me that although I've had struggles all through my life being a young carer, my dad's been off ill for the past 6 months. We've had like half the amount of money coming in. And this means that a lot of the time, even though it's literally 50p to get into the youth zone, I sometimes can't make it. But the youth zone have got different provisions and have provided a lot of young people with different things, whether it be Christmas food parcels, they do like stuff at Easter, they do literally anything, just help the young people. They've done that for me during HAF, so during the holidays, got free entry to free meal, and that did benefit quite a lot of young people, because I'm a young leader as well, so I saw it in juniors. With the poverty line going up, it's getting harder for me to, because I know what I want to do when I'm older. I want to be a paramedic, my dream job, but I don't know what route to go down anymore. University is expensive. In the northwest, there's no paramedic apprenticeships anymore. They've all been wiped out since COVID, so we've got nothing really for those people in poverty. And yeah.
Thank you for that, Gemma. If anyone's got any use for paramedics or anyone that can help Gemma, can you please come forward afterwards and see if we can help you? I'm just trying to rack my brains to know if I've got any contacts. Iain?
I haven't, but there is a point about apprenticeships, which is something I think is important because you raised this issue. The honest truth is that we, the government, successive governments have wanted to increase apprenticeships, but there's been issues and problems, and I talked about not having a FE college to back up the apprenticeship needs. It's very difficult to set apprenticeships in a particular area. The other problem, of course, is that that they tried to do to encourage everybody was to do this thing called the apprenticeship levy. It's been an unmitigated disaster because the bigger companies just treat it as an extra tax and just put it to one side, and the others find it too bureaucratic. So I would straight away get rid of that, and I would say simply you get massive tax relief if you bring in apprentices, no matter what your business. It doesn't have to be a rocket scientist or an aeronautical engineer who normally do lots of apprenticeships, but literally learning how to trade in a local open market is, I think, a reasonable apprenticeship because you learn quickly about how money works and all the rest of it. So it's good training. Almost anything you do could be an apprenticeship as you start. And there are two problems about lockdown, which has come about. You're quite right. Lots of people abandoned that process because it was too difficult. Now, and we want to restart that. But one of the areas that I think is really important, and the problem about the lockdown that's really caused it, is that basically quite a lot of people still now think that they can stay at home. Now, one of the big problems is causing real problems right now for people like you, is that if senior people do most of their work from home, how the hell do they help the young people just starting to get connected with work and to learn from them? And the answer is the skills that we have and impart have to be done face to face, so that you can ask a question of me, not on a screen that's two-dimensional, but say, I don't know how to do this, what do I do? And they'll go, oh, well, here's how you solve this problem. You know, it's simple, but this is what you do. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's how I learned. That's learning, okay? That's hands-on learning from someone that faced that problem before. Now you'll pass that on in generations to come. But if they're not in the office, they're not in the workplace, the answer is, how the hell did you learn that? And the answer we're now learning, and it is in our report, more and more young people are abandoning their first jobs because they're getting no training. So we've got to change that. There's got to be a massive push right now to open the door again to training and apprenticeships in businesses, and yours is one of them.
Thank you. Any more questions, please? That lady in the red, I think it is.
Hi there, my name's Emma and I'm from the Princess Trust, and just had 2 points. First of all, to Gemma, I'd love to talk to you because we do work extensively with the young service. We do a number of employability programmes and very practical help to feed into directly with employers. But my question actually is to the panel. I think the question of how do we get young people on side is really critical, and I was wondering if there was a particular group of young people that keep you awake at night that you're just really struggling to engage with. It's something we're thinking about all the time.
I think for me, when I set up RugbyWorks, it was about really, as anyone would do when they're setting up a business, you want to kind of do a bit of research. And two things I was very passionate about: helping young people and playing rugby and using sport as a way of changing people's lives. Because I genuinely tell you now, that changed my life. I lost my sister on the Marchioness. I was in a terrible way. I was making some really poor decisions, and I joined a rugby club. I mean, people look at me and think, "Oh, you must have grown up thinking you're going to play rugby." No one would ever choose to play rugby as a necessarily a focal point. So, but I joined a community, I joined a family, I joined something that made me change my direction of travel. So, for me, I started to interrogate that, and then I started to work with these young kids who've been excluded from mainstream, and that's what keeps me awake at night, because they are the UK's forgotten society. No one cares about these young people. Okay, they really don't, because they're so far down. Below the 80% of the young people that we work with who've been excluded are having free school meals. 80%. So, they're the ones that keep me awake at night, and the statistics are harrowing. 63% in prison. 1.4% have got a chance of getting 5 GCSEs or more. That's it. So their chances of gaining any meaningful employment are non-existent, and that is the part of society that we need to change. And it's about grabbing attention in life, isn't it? I've got 3 young kids, and it's quite hard to get their attention, right? So it really is about being relevant and understanding that. And sport has the power to change people's lives. Whether you're excluded in mainstream or in private education, it can change everyone's lives. I had to Google who the sports minister was on my way here. I'm very sorry to say that, but we've had so many ministers change so many times. I've got no idea who the sports minister was on my way here.
Who is it?
Now, if I don't know who that is, okay, imagine what the rest of society thinks about it. So it is about being relevant. We need to, I'm not interviewing for a job because the last thing I'd want to necessarily do. But why is a top-class sportswoman or man not in charge of sport in this country to make it actually a role model for the young people?
In another job opportunity opening up. Kathryn?
I mean, obviously, there's a whole range of young people, but the one group in particular that I worry about is those that are trapped in homes that are abusive, where they don't have any trusted adults outside of the home that they can reach out to. That's a really, really desperate situation, whether whatever the type of abuse, sexual, physical, or whatever.
On that theme, I'm going to answer this question, so if you don't mind, because I do a lot of work with the National Association of Children of Alcoholics, because I am a child of an alcoholic. And actually, in lockdown, numbers to the helpline went through the roof. We had this appalling situation of kids whose only salvation was going to school, being stuck with their often doubly alcoholic parents. So I had an alcoholic mother, but a perfectly functioning father who helped carry us all through it. But if you've got 2 parents who aren't able to run the home, then you're in trouble. And then similarly to what Lawrence was saying about, the outcomes, life chances for those kind of kids, the biggest chance is that they follow in their parents' footsteps and have huge problems with addiction and mental health problems and indeed low school attainment. So they're the kids that keep me awake at night. Iain?
Yeah, I mean, you can worry about all of this stuff really one way or the other right at the end. I mean, the truth is that when I first started this, I just spent a lot of time in Easterhouse and Gallagate. And the things that I saw in those areas were really was what made me really set this centre up. It's because it's the intergenerational nature of the collapse. That is, if you are in a dysfunctional family, maybe alcohol, could be drugs. When I was in Easterhouse, I remember going to the local Methodist pastor, who was a great man, and we still correspond with each other. But he ran a breakfast club, and the story he told me was terrible. He said that every morning you run a breakfast club because these are the kids that have to start the day, but they often can't. And he said we noticed on a couple of days that there were 2 kids. One was 7, and the other was, I think one was 7, and the other one was 5. And he said 2 boys, and they came in the morning before the club opened at about 6 o'clock in the morning. And they hadn't noticed in the beginning because they weren't there. When they came there, they saw them, and they realised actually they'd been there for over an hour just waiting outside the door. And then they kept coming in, and eventually he managed to get to talk to them. And it turned out that the problem was their parents were both serious drug addicts, alcoholics, drug addicts, poly-substance abusers. On the chart about whether you're in poverty or not, they probably weren't officially in poverty. I mean, they were marginal, but they were in that lower 10% bracket. But the kids never saw any of the money because the money was spent on their addictions. So what happened was there was no food in the house at all. At stage, occasionally they get a bit in, somebody had given them something, but it wasn't that the parents didn't want to care for their kids. It's they'd lost all reference point about what to do. So the 7-year-old became the responsible parent for the 5-year-old. I mean, it's heartbreaking, really. And it's a lack of chance. Intergenerational problems. You have to break that cycle. Otherwise, it just gets worse. So when you think about those kids, that's what keeps me awake.
until when?
5.
5. Can I first of all thank the panel, Iain Smith, Rachel de Souza DBE, Kathryn Morley. We also thank the Nadhim Zahawi, had to go early. It's been emotional, hasn't it? Crikey, but we're talking about really very important issues. So I've got tears in my eyes. Why don't we all have a drink? Gemma, why don't you hook up with the Princess Trust lady? We'll try and get you a paramedic job. But thank you very, very much to everybody for coming. We've got the room till 5. Have a mingle, have a quick drink, have a handful of nuts. Dry your eyes, and let's try and be positive for the children of tomorrow, because I think there's a lot of very positive sentiment in this room, which extends actually across the country, that we need to put children at the heart of everything that we're thinking and doing. Thank you very much.